is 2020 Spiritual Vision. Our theme for November is Living as Compassionate Conduits. Today's topic is How Engaged is God as Us? Ernest Holmes wrote in The Science of Mind, we need not leave the world, for we may engage in all of its activities without being controlled by them. We may in the world we may be in the world of affairs as masters of ourselves and our minds. Here are instructions from God to Ezekiel from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 2, verses 3 to 8. I am sending you to a rebellious nation. The people are obstinate and stubborn. Do not be afraid of what they say or be terrified by them. You must speak my words to them, whether they listen or fail to listen. But listen to what I say to you. Reverend Dr. William Barber spoke these words. Not saying something is not an option. You can't see injustice and say nothing. You can't see an abuse of human beings because of their race, their creed, or their sexuality and not say something. The prophetic call demands that we say something. How will the haters learn that they are wrong unless they learn of God's love? Let's affirm with gratefulness together. I am and will
Will
be
be.
a stand for
Stand for
love
love
in
in
this
this
world,
world,
no
no
matter
matter
who
who
is
is
listening.
listening.
I
I
am
am
listening
listening
to
to
the
the
voice
voice
within,
within,
and
and
I
I
am
am
engaged.
engaged.
And now let us bring in Reverend Kathleen.
Thank you, Ami. Oops. Thank you, Ami. I'd like to begin with this question that I have for you. What do you get when you cross an insomniac, an agnostic, and a dyslexic? Anybody? You get someone who stays up all night wondering if there really is a dog. You'll see the importance of this one as I get into this talk today. Because the truth is many of us at one time or another question whether there really is a God, particularly when we see hatred, unkindness, injustice in the world. I really do get that. And when things aren't going really well in our own lives. And yet, it's been proven to me over and over again that there really is a source of love, a divine presence that permeates all life, that is actually not out there somewhere only, but is within us, that very presence of love. And the truth is that in order for us to experience our values and our vision of a world that works for all coming into being is through us. That's the message for today, to truly be a living conduit of love and compassion. So here's the thing. The Spirit of God is 100% engaged with us 24/7. However, we have free will. So I'm asking you, are you 100% engaged with the God presence within you? Are you engaged with the God presence in all? So today I'm offering spiritual principles of spiritual engagement, how to stay spiritually engaged when we are in the world. You know, it's easier when we're in our meditation practice. I totally get that. Or when we're doing our prayer, which we call spiritual mind treatment. But can we stay centered in that same consciousness of oneness and unity and love when we're walking through the world? So I'd like to begin with a story of Ezekiel. Ezekiel was about 30 years old when he was called, when he received an assignment from God. He was asked to speak up and stand up to injustice with people who were oppressed and who, frankly, were wondering whether there really was a God. They had been exiled by the Babylonians at the time, and the Babylonians were the ones who had taken economic power, political power, and also had taken power over the religious teachings and used them to manipulate people, to get people to commit injustice to one another. And so the exiled people were in shock. They were in fear. They were under the trance of this energy of fear that was perpetrated by the Babylonians, the ones in power. And so here we are, someone who is actually taking the time to meditate and listen deeply within, Ezekiel. So Ezekiel was available and ready to hear the call. And the call was to be a voice of love, a voice of truth, a voice of justice in this world that had gone temporarily insane. And so, as people of faith that had been questioning the existence of God, Ezekiel had a really challenging task before him, because these were people who had lost hope to a great extent. And so he had to realize, and God told him this, you heard the quote, that he had to speak up whether they listened or not. He had to speak up whether they threw him out or rejected him or whatever they did. But he was called to be the voice of truth, no matter what. So God basically told Ezekiel that the time was over for Ezekiel to bow down to oppression. The time was over to be silent about injustice. The time was to now stand up and speak up, and to break that trance of the voice of hatred and oppression and injustice. So with that story in mind, I want us to review the way we look at teaching stories like the story of Ezekiel. We look at it on 3 levels. The first level is the story itself, which I just told. The second level is the moral teaching, and I think the moral teaching is pretty clear. The importance, and it's the importance of standing up in the midst of injustice and speaking up, even if we're not listened to. And there's also a metaphysical story. There's a metaphysical aspect to this story. And it is the story of God calling upon the prophet Ezekiel, which is a study of the conditioned mind and the divine mind in each and every one of us. So when we look at these stories, we ask ourselves, how am I each one of the characters in this story, as a way to transform those aspects of the conditioned mind that are holding us back. So yes, that means that we are the presence of God that is witnessing the injustice and very upset about it, and actually informing our human self to take action and to speak up. We are also the people who have given up hope, who have there's an aspect of us, the conditioned mind, when we get caught up in the appearances of what's going on in the world, and we have lost our connection with the truth and with the ability to be a co-creator with God and to bring forth our vision of heaven on earth and our values of love and compassion. We are also the we are also the Babylonians. Yeah. That part of us that is self-interested and doesn't really care about the needs of others at times. And is and maybe even takes advantage. We all have those tendencies at times, no matter how long we've been on the spiritual path. And we are the ones who remain silent. We are the ones who remain silent in the midst of injustice. And we are the prophet Ezekiel, who, upon hearing the message of what he was to do, to speak up and stand up in the face of all of this resistance of his people and the hopelessness of his people, and with the fear that he would get kicked out and he'd get rejected or he'd be ignored or something worse, maybe even worse than that. So we are all of that. And when we look at it from a metaphysical standpoint as well as from a moral standpoint, then we are fed spiritually and we're given beautiful spiritual tools to proceed in our world and to truly be that difference that we came here to be. So principle number 1 for spiritual engagement: being in the world, but not of the world. Ezekiel demonstrated what it meant to do this, to be in the world, but not of the world, when he finally stood up and did what he needed to do. But this entire story really then, for us, is a strong message that being spiritual does not mean spending all of our time in meditation and all of our time withdrawn from the world and all of our time only with people who are in alignment with us. It also means that being spiritual means being everyday mystics, getting out in the world, being with people who have different points of view, and yet at the same time standing and speaking up for what we believe in. Everyday mystics, I love that. Everyday mystics. Actually, social, spiritual activists. To be in the world, engaged in it, but not of it. So what are we of? We are of the presence of God. That means we are guided by a higher vision, guided by a higher truth. Our thoughts, words, and actions emanating from that higher place. We must be willing, in order to do that, to be that high vibration, or the vibration of the Most High, to do what they do in the 12-step programs, to take a fearless and moral inventory of all of our beliefs and all of our values, and let go of the ones that aren't in alignment with our truth. To let go of all of that does not serve the greater good. So this process of inquiry, internal inquiry, is absolutely necessary in order for us to be that shining light in the world, to be that voice of truth and love. And it also prevents something really important, which we've seen a lot. It prevents us from falling prey to falsehood and to drama and to fear, and to hold true and strong to what we know serves the greater good, which is love and compassion. Spiritual principle of engagement number 2, speaking up and standing up for love and justice. I'm going to read that quote again by Reverend Dr. William Barber, who, by the way, and I don't know if he is at this point in time, but he has been and may still be, I really need to look that up, the NAACP leader in the state of North Carolina. And he said, not saying something is not an option. You can't see injustice and say nothing. You can't see an abuse of human beings because of their race, their creed, and their sexuality and not say something. The prophetic call demands that we say something. How will the haters learn that they're wrong unless they learn of God's love? And it's true, if we remain silent, how will those who have gotten off the path of love know that they are not on the path of love unless we speak up? So I know that in one way or another, you and I are being called to speak up. We're being called to not only speak up, but to be the living conduits of love and compassion and truth, to be the voice of unity in a time of divisiveness. And God's love cannot be revealed unless we allow ourselves to be the conduits of that love. And I think of all the great role models of how this is done. And it can be done, nonviolence is basically standing up and practicing love at the same time, when those methods of nonviolent protest. So the people like King and Gandhi and John Lewis, Rosa Parks, and then I think of some of the other contemporaries now, like Greta Thunberg, and those who are the activists not only for civil rights, but for our planet, the care of our planet. We have great role models, and you may be one of those role models, and I imagine you probably are. Psalm 94 essentially says, who will speak up and stand up for those experiencing injustice? This has been something that's been around for eons. The wake-up call. Are you the one being called to stand up for justice? Sometimes we don't like to say against injustice, but stand up for justice, for love. Principle of engagement number 3, speaking up and standing up even if others refuse to listen. This is a big one. And I know this is a big one for ministers. We are basically taught that yes, we will be saying some things that will make people uncomfortable. And yet that's part of our role, is to get people off center and out of their patterns that don't serve them, and to awaken to a higher way of walking through this life as the very presence of God, individualized that we are. So we choose to be the voice of love, to be the presence of love, the presence of compassion, even if we are afraid that we will be ignored, even if we know it's not the popular thing to say and to speak up, even if we know that we will be ignored and rejected or who knows what. I was thinking about Thoreau. Thoreau, after his awakening, really stood up and spoke up and wrote against slavery, for freeing the black people in our country. And for that, he was thrown in jail. And I heard a story of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was his buddy, coming and seeing him in jail. And he said, Thoreau, what are you doing in jail? And Thoreau said, why aren't you in jail? Really calling Emerson to speak up and stand up. And then I think about John Lewis and Martin Luther King and all of their followers, so many of them who stood up for what is good and right, for human rights, in a nonviolent way, and were still thrown in jail. So are you seeing people being treated unjustly and saying nothing? Are you seeing people treated unjustly because of their age, their sexual orientation, because of their race, and saying nothing? Are you watching religion, and that means the teachings of Jesus, which are about love, being used as a tool of hatred and saying nothing. The prophetic call then is to say something about injustice, even in the face of resistance. Reverend Dr. William Barber asks, how will the haters know that hating is wrong unless we speak up for love? He goes on to say, how will those who perpetuate divisiveness know that it's wrong unless we speak up for unity? And I add to that, unless we speak up for a world that works for all. Reverend Barber also said, how in heaven can you serve God and the truth of love without sometimes offending someone? Offending them because they aren't in alignment with love. They're in alignment with something else, with fear, with the conditioned mind. Principle number 4 of spiritual engagement. Speaking up offers hope to those who feel hopeless. That's the beauty of speaking up. And in the story of Ezekiel, God wanted to demonstrate to him what would happen when he shared his message of injustice and hope with dry bones. I think all of you remember the dry bones story. These dry bones represent those who have lost hope, those who are discouraged, those who are either have given up or about to give up on making any progress. So the dry bones represent those discouraged by discrimination and racism, children who are bullied for being different, those who are sick and not able to pay health care, immigrants who are turned away, sent away, mistreated, their children put in cages, and on top of that, called aliens, children of God. That, then what will, okay, if we don't speak up and stand up for things like that, we don't stand up for the dry bones of hopelessness in our fellow humans, then how on earth, how in heaven will we ever be able to make progress in conscious evolution and in supporting others in becoming prosperous and thriving beings? We have teachings that support people in doing that. Our knowledge of not only the power of love and divine connection with the God within, but also the teachings about the creative process and how to use it to manifest a style of life and living that supports us in sharing our gifts and talents with the world. We have that. We can offer that. And you, each one of you, are the spokesmen and women for this teaching. So we don't have to be a street activist to be the voice of love, to be the voice of truth, and to stand up for what is right. However, I do believe that each in our own unique way, we are being called to stand up and to speak up. We've just elected a president of the United States who is calling for unity. Are you answering that call? That's my question. So now is the time, my friends, and we are the people to answer that call. So I'd like you to repeat after me. I am and I will stand for love.
I am and I will stand for love
in this world. No matter who is listening.
No matter who is listening.
I am listening to the voice of love.
I am listening to the voice of love.
And I am engaged.
And I am engaged.
And so it is.
And so it is.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, my friends. And now I would like to introduce